We have our large intestine. So your small intestine tries to digest all these biological macromolecules. Then when it's done, remember that ileum, that's the final part of the small intestines. Then it enters the large intestine. So the first part of the large intestine is your cecum. So your cecum is a little pouch. And in other animals, it's actually enlarged, but in humans, it's just like a small little pouch compared to the rest of the large intestines. Then you have the appendix. So the appendix, they used to think like, okay, this is a leftover, what we call a vestigial organ from evolution. But the appendix is now more and more literature, scientific literature is coming up, like it might be a reservoir of good bacteria, which we will get to hopefully this lecture. But appendix is, that's what they think of it. You don't need it to live, but they think it helps you by being like a bank or somewhere where the good bacteria that are supposed to be inside of your GI tract hang out. And if you have an appendectomy, well, notice where it is in the body. I should put a top hat question. Alright, so if you're thinking about quadrants of the body, so remember there are 4 quadrants. You have your upper and left, your lower left, your upper right, and lower right quadrants. Which quadrant is the appendix located in? Upper, lower, left, or right? Let's ask the chat. Yeah, so that's what we're seeing here, lower right quadrant. So that's a classic sign. So remember that suffix, that ending itis, that refers to inflammation. So if you have inflammation of the appendix, you have appendicitis. Now, what's a classic sign of appendicitis? Ooh, ow, my lower right side. I feel like I'm being stabbed there. So that's like a classic sign of appendicitis. And this is where like what typically happens. Okay, we have to get that appendix out because remember, there's all the bacteria in your gut. So if that appendix or there's different things. There's perforation, where even if it's a perforation, that means there's a hole in the appendix. That means the lining of the appendix has been ruptured. Now all the bacteria can leak out of the appendix and into the rest of your abdominal cavity. So the bacteria in your abdomen should be confined to your GI tract. They should not be mixing in with all your interstitial fluid and all the other parts of your body outside of the GI tract, because that should be sterile. So if those bacteria get there, they can go crazy. Like, ooh, I have all this oxygen, I have all these nutrients, I can gobble this up, nothing's holding me back. So that's why it's important to treat appendicitis as soon as possible. And hopefully you won't get perforation, or if it totally bursts, that's what we call a ruptured appendix. That's even worse because now you're spilling bacteria out into your GI tract. And if you're like me, if you've had an appendectomy, you know that, okay, we have to get it out. But what's the difference between an intact appendix and a perforated or ruptured appendix? Well, luckily I caught mine just before it was about to, it was like really big. Like when I look at the CT scan, I mean, your appendix is like roughly the size of a pinky, but when I looked at the CT scan, it was like huge. It was like this. I'm like, oh, get it out of me. It was like, and the other thing is too is like I was thinking, okay, I know what appendicitis is, but I thought it was just like constipation because okay, I was like, okay, it's lower than my intestines, but I'm like, it wasn't localized just to my lower right part. It was kind of like a general lower abdomen pain. So again, lower right doesn't, not all appendicitis cases have it just in that right side. Mine was more general on the lower part of my abdomen in general. But again, the difference between an intact and a ruptured or perforated appendix is length of stay in the hospital. I was out the next day. They took my appendix out. I just need to take painkillers for that night because I just had emergency surgery. But I was pretty much walking the day after, and I think they discharged me. Yeah, after an overnight stay, I was out. But if you have bacteria growing, like rupturing from your appendix into the rest of your abdominal cavity, they have to basically clean you out. And you'll be on antibiotics for at least a week, possibly 2 weeks if it's really bad. So yeah, that's the difference and why it's important if you feel that lower right pain that you kind of check it out and make sure it's like make sure it's not appendicitis, or if it is, hopefully you caught it before it actually ruptures. So again, appendix is good for the good bacteria, but good bacteria again are only good if they stay where they're supposed to be, not in the rest of your body. Okay, so then what we have here from the cecum, then you have your colon, and then what we have here is ascending colon. So again, When you go up the stairs, you ascend, or when you go take off in an airplane, you ascend up in the air. So ascending colon is going upwards. And then what plane goes across this way across your body? The horizontal or transverse plane. Again, anatomical planes and directions coming in handy. What's the opposite of ascending? We're going to go up, and now we're going to go down. So now we're going to descend. So descending colon is the part that's after a transverse colon. And then you have your sigmoid colon. Whenever you see that term sigmoid, it refers to something that's S-shaped. And it's kind of roughly S-shaped over here. So that's why it's called the sigmoid colon. And then you have the rectum. That's the final part. And the hole that's at the end of the rectum is the anus. So again, now we've traveled throughout the whole GI tract from mouth to anus. So again, their GI tract is a tube. It just bends different ways. And these little bends here are called flexures. Now, do I want you to know specific flexures? And maybe for advanced anatomy class. But for now, just the parts of the colon and large intestines in order.